Hello, and welcome to Books in the World. I'm your host, Nancy Richard, and with me today is Katrina Valenzuela, author of River of Stars, Nights of Jasmine. Welcome, Katrina. It's nice to have you here.
Nice to see you.
I really enjoyed your book very much, and I'm fascinated to find out a little bit more about Egypt and the culture of Egypt after having read your book. I didn't know very much about it before I read the book. I've heard about it and I've read other books, but yours was really insightful and I enjoyed it very much. I'm wondering, you're a self-described introvert. How did you happen to write it?
The same as with everything in my life. I'm somehow thrust into a leadership role no matter what I do. Mm-hmm. And writing the book, you'll notice I don't use my own name. The main character is called Kara. I found when I started writing it was too close. I felt like I needed some distance in order to write so personally. Because, you know, my book is very personal. Mm-hmm. So just giving myself that much distance from the character allowed me to write easily from my heart, because I only do things from my heart whenever possible. So I grew to love that character and give her a voice, and I guess it sounds a little bit schizophrenic, but it was Kara, and I was writing about her.
So it wasn't as personal in some ways.
Yeah,
it gave
helped
you
me.
a bit of separation from the character, mm-hmm. even though it was about you.
Yeah.
One thing in the beginning of the book, you write that a psychic had done a reading for you, and when it was a she, correct?
An astrologer.
An astrologer.
Yeah.
Okay, it was an astrologer, and she said that if you were in Ireland, they would have left you out at the crossroads for the fairies, which I found really interesting. You must have been taken back a little bit by it, and that you had all of the signs in your chart of a witch and a sorcerer, and this. Yeah. This brought a realization to you, or some insight as to why you felt a little bit odd. And I'm wondering, how has that changed over time, or has it?
No, it hasn't changed at all. I've just grown into the role. You know, I mm-hmm. became accepting of it. Well, I was born at midnight on the equinox, and it was the darkest moment of the new moon. Mm-hmm. So those three things together say, watch out, she's not going to be an easy kid. I was an easy kid, I just had my own world.
Uh-huh. And growing up, you did a lot of adventuring, too. You know, you were talking about how you hung out at Harvard Square and you met a lot of interesting people.
Yeah, well, I didn't think of it as an adventure then. I was essentially I don't want to say a street kid, but I was kind of lost through the 60s. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I would hang around, because there were a lot of intellectual conversations and there were mystical friends that I had, and it was a great place to be. So yeah. Yeah,
and this is actually your introduction to Egypt from
yes.
the people that you met there.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And it started you on a journey in your life that has had a profound impact on you, correct?
It really has. You know, when you look back over your life and you see there are certain moments that create your destiny. Mm-hmm. When I decided to live with my godfather in Harvard Square, that completely changed the trajectory of my life in a good way.
In a good way, yes, it was. And it had it's very interesting, because one of the things that I read in the book that I thought was really funny is, I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I quote you right, but it says, having wasted endless hours of my life waiting for Egyptians, which made me laugh because I have an Ethiopian son-in-law and his family is like that too. So I instantly bonded with that one. And I'm wondering, you know, you write a lot about Egypt in your book, but you also write about a lot of other places that you've visited. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering about this sense of timelessness, and have you experienced it in other places that you've been, and what other places have you been?
Oh dear. Well, I've led tours. I was never a vacationer. I've never gone on a vacation, ever, just to go on a vacation. But I've always brought at least 20 to 40 people with me, whether for my company or for other senior tour companies, they call them. Let's see, there was all of Europe, Morocco, Jordan, Turkey, Central and South America, Caribbean. I would go wherever I was sent when I worked for these companies. But always I would try to land in Egypt, because I always felt that was my base, my home, that and Cape Cod.
So having two homes, do you occasionally feel as though your heart's in two places?
I did for most of my life. I don't any longer, unless I watch some documentary about Egypt, then I say, oh my God, I have to go back. But I think that I've paid my karma, or my agreement with Egypt. I've always felt I made some soul agreement, and I needed to dedicate all those years to helping Egypt by bringing people who love to spend money. You know, they help the economy. And also by having meditations in all those pyramids and temples. We have what we call grounding the energy. So I felt as though we were doing any energy exchange between all these spiritual light workers and the sacred land of Egypt.
You mentioned your spiritual connection with Egypt, but part of your book deals with that. Another part of it are hilarious stories about being a tour manager while you were there. The anecdotes had me laughing out loud, which I don't do all the time when I'm reading a book, even when
That's
it's
what
funny.
I keep hearing from people.
Yeah, it's really, really funny. It's almost a window on the type of people that go on these tours.
Yes.
You've seen them all. I can just imagine.
I think so. Yep.
How many years did you do tours?
Oh, let's see. My first one was in '86, and I did them right up until 2010.
Okay, so that's
I don't
20
deal in
odd.
linear time. I never know how many years anything is.
I'm trying to add it up. It's like it's definitely more than 20 years
There's a lot
worth
of years, yeah.
of running around. And what kind of effect did that? Now you were a single mom, and you have a son who's now grown. And how old was he when you first started doing this?
He was 16, and I took him with me until he no longer wanted to go with me. And he said, Mom, I have my homework, I have my life, I have college. So.
I've got to wash my hair. In other words.
But it was a great education for him, and he tells stories like no one. Everybody just stops and listens because he has so many stories from hanging out with me. I wish he would write a book.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, when you were writing the book, did you go back to him and refer to some of his
A
stories?
few times, and he would just say, just be sure you don't use my name. I said, well, what name would you like? So he chose the name Adam.
Oh, okay. Well, that was kind of an appropriate first man, right?
Yes,
so
that's what
definitely
he
the
said.
first man in your
I'm the
life.
first man, yeah.
Yeah. I find that too that it's interesting to see how, as the book progresses, you start talking about the political and social situations in Egypt and how they changed and got. I saw them as getting much, much darker and more
Yes, they
restrictive.
were. For some time they were.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as in the opening chapters, when I'm visiting my godfather and I tell him I'm going to find the Tsar, which are these women of wisdom who have been running these ceremonies for healing for hundreds of years. And he's very alarmed because the Tsar has become forbidden to the extent that you'll be arrested and put in prison if you do that. So I did it. And he warns me, I'm not going to come and get you if you're in prison. I'm leaving the country on business. But things like that would happen. Things that I would normally do while in Egypt, somebody would say, oh, that's forbidden now. We'll need to arrest you. I said, no. So, like when I got the keys from the Rais to open the Luxor temple, for me that was simply what had to be done. But I found later that I could have been arrested or worse.
That was quite a story. Maybe I don't want to, tip off anybody who's reading the book, but could you just tell us what a rais is so that they know what it
rais
is?
just simply means the leader. So there's the rais, the captain of a boat. He happened to be the rais who was in charge of the entire Luxor temple, which is a 3-mile complex and just an amazing place. So, yeah, we had quite an encounter.
Which is described very well in the book, and also extremely hilarious. And the whole time while I was reading the incident, I'm thinking, oh, I hope she doesn't get caught in here, because that would have been a horrible scandal.
It would have been terrible, yeah.
And the man was terrified. It was really funny too, because his entire crew was terrified of him.
Yeah.
You must have felt rather powerful. Terrified.
Oh, no, I felt terrible because I thought that he had died of a heart attack.
Oh, well, no, that wouldn't have been
because
so
he
good.
was gasping and choking and moaning, and I ran out with the keys, and then I had to wait and wait for my land manager to call and tell me he was still living. I thought truly I had killed him. I was just very upset.
Uh-huh.
But we had a great meditation, and that brought us exactly to the moment when that excavation occurred. There was something so synchronistic about the whole thing.
And just tell people what excavation you were there for.
Well, it was in 1989, and there had been hints of something existing under the main courtyard, which is all granite blocks. And a team had gone in at the same time that we were in the back of the temple with our meditation. And we heard all this commotion going on, and we came out, and they were lifting these beautiful statues right out of the ground. And it was the statue of the deity that we had led our meditation for. It was just
very
amazing.
ironic.
Yeah.
But in some way, actually almost completely right.
Yeah, I felt it was very fated.
Very fated. Your participation in the czar ceremony, getting back to this, it seemed as though it went on for a while in the book,
Oh
too.
my God,
it was
it
a
went
quest.
on all night. Oh, the seeking of it.
Seeking
Yes,
of it.
It took years.
It took years to actually find it and be able to be part of it.
Accepted, because they don't just accept foreigners to come into a sacred ceremony in somebody's home,
Right.
for which they could be imprisoned. So I had to convince them that I was sincere, and I was. I wasn't going there for fun. I felt it was essential to my healing to be part of it. And they couldn't have been nicer.
Yeah. The women that were a part of that were interesting in that they were different from a lot of the other Egyptian women that you.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
the poorest of the poor
Poorest.
of Egypt. Yeah, they live in very poor areas.
And could you tell us a little bit about the way things are for women in Egypt?
Well, it depends upon one's social strata. For poor women, it's probably as bad as it has always been. For middle class and upper class women, it's better now that Mubarak is gone. And Morsi had a very brief stay, which was really scary. But life has gotten better. I'm not that tuned into the political scene, but from what I'm hearing from my friends who are still in Egypt, my Egyptian friends, is that life has improved quite a lot.
And this is actually improvement that you've seen since 2010 when the revolution
Yes.
happened.
Yeah.
And that was the last time you were there?
Yeah. I didn't leave because of the revolution. It makes it sound like I was a wanted woman. No,
Well, maybe you were.
Maybe.
Wanted by someone.
Yeah. I left because things were becoming very uncomfortable, where I was being questioned whether I was a spy. And there was all this suspicion among Egyptians toward one another, similar to what we have now in our country.
Yes.
And it was no longer a happy place to be. So when I got home and I saw the revolution on the TV, I was so thrilled. Oh my God, it was so exciting. And then it was very sad because I saw a lot of the children that I knew in the streets with the soldiers firing,
tanks
the tanks coming down the street. It's quite a time.
Yeah. But in the long term, the political situation and the cultural situation in Egypt has gotten better in the last 8 years. Do you feel that it's a safe place for people to go to travel from here?
I have always felt, based on actual statistics, that we are safer in Egypt than we are in this country, especially as women. Violence toward women in this country is among the top in the world. So I don't think of it as a dangerous place. I have never had any problem in Egypt, ever. There's a lot of flirting, but it's never considered that it would go any further than that. So I don't consider that harassment. If a man says, "Oh, you look lovely tonight," that's not harassment. So, but there's plenty of that sort of flirtation. That's what Egyptians are famous for.
Well, it's like entertainment.
It's like Omar Sharif.
Right.
But I still feel very safe in Egypt.
I also found that your empathy for single mothers or the poor in Egypt it definitely comes through in your book. And I'm wondering too, we were talking earlier about the difference between the life of a single parent in the United States or a single mother in the United States and that of a woman who doesn't have a husband and is raising children in Egypt. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, if a woman is having a child, it's demanded that they marry. That man must marry her. If that person doesn't support his children, he's ostracized. And we forget in this country that that is traditionally the most severe punishment, is to turn your back on someone and pretend they no longer exist. That's what the entire community does to a man who is cruel to his family or doesn't support them. It works because he wants to belong somewhere, and he does step up to the plate and do what he can. So my Egyptian women friends, as I mentioned, my friend Shireen, she really wants a marriage of love, but her family is pushing her toward a marriage of, combining two wealthy families, or an arranged marriage. I can't say that it's a terrible idea because I've seen a lot of arranged marriages work beautifully.
And a lot of marriages for love don't work out at all.
We know that.
Of course.
I've only married for love, but this time it has worked very nicely.
Yes, and you are currently married.
Yes, alhamdulillah, I'm currently married to the man that I meet at the end of the book. And of all things, it was so shocking to me, he turns out to be American. And I have not dated any Americans in decades, at least not for any more than a few weeks. So, yeah.
Well, he had to pretty much chase you down.
Oh my God, he was,
poor man.
Obnoxious. He wouldn't stop. But
I don't know. I think he was trying very desperately to get your attention.
He was.
Yes.
And I prejudged him, and he turned out to be so much nicer than I had imagined, and he still is. All these years later, 17 years now, we'll be married.
Well, he had to work hard for it.
Yeah.
He did. The last few chapters of your book talk about, there's an anecdote about a New Age convention which is juxtaposed with your overwhelming grief for your family, your father and your uncle, and falling in love at the same time, which you said, mishmaul, which means unbelievable.
But also, menopause kicked in.
Oh yeah, okay, everything the fourth leg on this chair.
On this broken chair. Yeah.
Oh, and you were sick with a nasty virus too.
Oh, it was the worst flu I ever had in my life.
So all of this was happening all at the, and I was really drawn to the information that you put in there about the pyramids. We have pyramids here. There's supposed to be 3, but one of them went missing.
Yes,
Could you tell us
missing.
a little about that, about the pyramids and the psychic connection?
Oh, it's a huge topic, but
That's all right. We have a little bit of time.
there was a time period on Earth when pyramids were built in every major power point of the Earth. Mm-hmm. All the places that we consider powerful places of spirit, pyramids were built. But if you look at the ley lines of the planet, like the acupuncture lines of the planet, all of them converge at the Giza Plateau. So I know I've been to a lot of sacred sites all over the world. They're all powerful, wonderful, but the Giza Plateau is the culmination of all of it. And so it changes people. It's just amazing how people arrive in Egypt, they look at the pyramids, and they start crying. And then I take them into the temples and tombs and more pyramids, and it's a breaking down. Mm-hmm. And you know, we have to break down before we have a breakthrough. So one of my more practical passengers one day, she said, you know the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? And I said, yeah. And she said, he only took them to the park. But sometimes it seemed like I was leading a group of really, truly disturbed people. And then
yes, from the stories I gathered that.
But whatever you take into a place like that, it has to come to the surface so it can be released. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, I have infinite patience with people. I have no patience with numbers, with bureaucracy, but with people I do. I absolutely love people. So I would be sort of helping them birth themselves throughout the tour. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they got pretty unpleasant too.
Can you tell us a little, this question sort of comes up from what we're talking about now, but a little bit about your experience with the New Age people that go on these tours, just because some of it is pretty funny.
Yes, it was very funny.
How many Nefertitis did you have?
Every time I did a tour, usually they were conferences, 50 to 100 people, there would be at least 5 Nefertitis. There'd be maybe 6 to 10 Ramses. There'd be lots of Cleopatras. And then when they found out of Queen Hatshepsut, who was a great, great pharaoh, suddenly we had Hatshepsuts left and right.
So nobody was like a serving girl?
Oh, no.
That would have been my choice, actually.
Well, actually, there were plenty, but they didn't raise their hand to say, I was a serving girl. It was usually, and I don't like to
oh, you don't want to poke fun, but
people,
it is interesting how this comes
I could
about.
always see just by the way they entered the room. Ah, there's another Nefertiti. The way they'd carry themselves. They'd have a stack of pre-signed 8x10 glossies on themselves. Because a lot of these were people who couldn't make it as actresses and actors, mm-hmm. so they decided to take on a famous persona.
Oh, goodness.
And I had to be kind and go along with it, you know.
Well, yeah, that's your job, or it was. So for people who are interested in reading more about Egyptian spiritualism or history, do you have any books that you would recommend for them to read, other than yours, of course?
Well, all of the works of Graham Hancock, mm-hmm. Robert Bauval, Dr. Carmen Bolter, books and videos by all of them. Mm-hmm. And they're all from a more intellectual viewpoint, researched and charts and graphs and all.
That's a good start.
Yeah, I always go back to the ancient mystery school teachings, mm-hmm. the Kybalion, mm-hmm. which is not the Kabbalah, which is a great
Kybalion.
Kybalion, Kybalion. Mm-hmm. It's now called the Emerald Tablets because I guess nobody could remember the name of it. But anyway, it's a very, very ancient text. I teach it. It's part of what I've been teaching for since 1980.
Well, it's time for us to wrap up, and I would like to say thank you so much for being with us today,
Oh,
Katrina
thanks for having me.
Valenzuela. I want to say it right. And thank you for being on the show with us, and thank you all for tuning in and watching.